who just got out of the Army. So all Army people had to go through boot camp. That first day in boot camp was probably difficult. But by the time boot camp was over, it was manageable. And you had the confidence to know, I can do this, as hard as it might be. It's the same thing. Consistent application of the tools that we're talking about, and you will get stronger, you will get better, and it prepares you for the next level. So, the next thing we would have students to do is to actually create a mock schedule. And so, again, you'll receive a handout via email and attachment, and it'll just be a rectangle with a bunch of small rectangles on it, but it will allow them to create a visual look at what their weekly schedule is going to look like. And so we always start with the fixed items. And in this case, that would be your course. So the course will go in first. If the student has a part-time job, then we put in those fixed work hours into the schedule. And then we work our way around. Any fixed commitments after the classes, we put in all the other fixed commitments. And then we start to work in those, if they're taking 3 5-credit classes, now we got to find 45 hours of study time. And even in the context of a part-time job, we have to also factor in, you have to drive or take the bus, or we have to get to work. So that takes time too. And so when you get this sample blank schedule that you could replicate and give to your students, I will also include a copy of a sample schedule that's already been filled out. And one of the big surprises that most students find when we are doing this kind of work and they create this kind of schedule, because I don't give them extensive directions on how to do it. I let them do it on their own, and then I'll critique it later and we'll flesh it out. But one of the things that I have consistently found where students make mistakes is their first attempt at this, they rarely put in a lot of study time on Saturdays and Sundays. So it's as if, that's the way it was for me in high school, you know, the books got put down Friday night and they didn't get picked up again until Monday morning going back to school. So what shocks them is, in order to get those 45 hours, especially if you're working, you can't do it if you don't do Saturdays and Sundays. And so that's the big surprise that most of them have to contend with. And that's the big cultural change, that this is a 7-day-a-week proposition. And of course, like I say, 3 hours for every hour in class, if that is what allows you to achieve your goals. If it does not, it may take more than 3. So now it's not a matter of not knowing what to do. It's a matter of whether you have that intestinal fortitude to do it. So here are some items that we would want students to take into consideration as they're planning their schedule. Again, what I've seen historically is a lot of times students will schedule these marathon study sessions. So they've got all these fixed commitments, you know, all over the place, and then they have these gaps and they'll just fill those in with time to study. On the one hand, it's okay to have schedule a significant amount of time in a given day for study, but not hour after hour after hour. And what a lot of students fail to do is to take into consideration that a typical class that you take on our campus is 50 minutes long. And then there's a break. There's a 10-minute break for you to get to your next class. So your study sessions somewhat mirror. When you're first starting out, it may be difficult for you to study for a 50-minute period straight. So then study for a 30-minute period straight. and take a 5-minute break, or a 25-minute period and take a 5-minute break or a 7-minute break, until you build up the strength and the capacity to study for longer periods of time. But you want to build in consistent breaks in your study time and time again. Another issue that becomes important is understanding yourself. So, for example, if I were to ask you, at what time of the day or evening do you have your best energy? When do you feel the most energized in a day? For some people, that's at night. For other people, that's in the morning. For other people, it may be late afternoon. Understanding where your best energy is very important, because that's when you should take on your most challenging work. But we have to factor all of this into our planning process. The other thing is, and something else you'll be receiving via email, is just little things about common time wasters and things like this. But my biggest concern is the way that students organize their day and their week. So, again, time wasters. I work on the main campus, and so I have the opportunity to leave my office from time to time and maybe walk over to the cafeteria and get a cup of coffee or something like that, or even go and get some lunch in the cafeteria. And I pay attention when I'm there, so I'm observing what are students doing in the cafeteria. Oftentimes I see students in groups, pairs, 3s, 4s, and they're helping each other, maybe with math or with homework or something like that. But I see a lot of students who are just kicking it. So they're obviously in between classes, right? But that in between class time is not being used for maximum efficiency. It's being used to socialize with their friends and stuff. And I'm arguing with students, you don't have time to waste. You have no time. So one of the best things that you could do after a lecture class or something like that, and you have an hour gap in between that and your next class, there's an hour where you can get some study in there. If nothing else, you can get some reading in. And guess what? That's an hour that you don't have to do it at night. So maybe that hour frees up some of your evening time to watch maybe your one TV program a week that I'll allow you to watch. So it's trying to get them to think more holistically and get focused, and it all ties into that whole thing about that sense of purpose. Why are you here? Why are you doing this? Remember, you chose to do this. I like to say to my students that I haven't received any documentation from the court that said that anybody in my class is by court order. So that means that you chose to do this, okay? So if you chose to do it, let's do it. Let's be serious about it. The good news is you only have to be real serious for 11 weeks. Then you can exhale, okay? Take a little break, get a little breather, and then we start over again for the next quarter. So those are the kind of contexts that we try to put in there. So then you're going to receive kind of a larger document, which is called Efficient Time Scheduling. And this is the one that would take maybe a couple of class periods to work your way through with your students that you're working with. But I give it to them early in the start of the class because it helps them to get this big picture of what it is that they're trying to do over the course of a quarter. So they're going to learn how to do an assignment list. They're going to learn how to do the quarterly calendar that we talked about before. They're going to learn how to create a master weekly schedule. And then a separate weekly schedule, which ultimately culminates into a to-do list. There are many people who already operate from to-do lists, which is great, but not everybody does. And so we want to show them what that tool looks like. After that, it's their choice whether they want to use it or not. But we have plenty of research that indicates that this is a very beneficial, a very useful tool that students can use. Okay, so I don't really want to focus on these. There's only two more. This one is prepared for final. I don't want to focus on that, but I want to say this. There's a structure to the weekly routine for students, and I use the metaphor of the Army and of sports, working out at the gym or what have you. And it's that concept of consistent, regular attention, time on task, will allow you to get better, stronger, faster at the task that you are attempting to perform. So let me give you something that worked for me the latter part of my undergraduate career and definitely in my graduate school career. So when you first sit in a class, the teacher is going to give you a course syllabus. And the first thing you should do with that syllabus is to make note of every test date, every assignment due date, put those in your day timer or however you keep track of it, your calendar, your phone, your smart device, however you keep track of that. And so once we have that, then for every deadline that appears in your calendar, we work backwards from the due date to deadline date, and we develop a strategy for time on task, study times, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So now it gets more specific. So let's say it's day one of the class. You got 3 classes, and you went to all 3 classes, and they've given you your assignment. And mostly in the beginning, it's reading. So you go home that night, and they say, okay, for each class, you're going to read chapter 1. Now, if I get a chance, because now we have these pre-college orientation classes, FYE, at Bellevue College. So the students that I get to teach, you know, I tell them, by day 1, in any class that you take, you should already be through chapter 1. Okay? By day 1, of any class that you take, you should already have read chapter 1 before you get there. So when the instructor is covering chapter 1, for you, that's a review. Okay? So now that night we're going to go home and they said, okay, well, you got to read chapter 1. Well, you already read it. And then the teacher covered it in class. So what I would do is say, before we move on to chapter 2, we first go back and review chapter 1 again. Then we read chapter 2. Okay? The next night, or the next few days when it's time to do chapter 3, we don't come home, open the book, and start dealing with chapter 3. We come home, we open the book, or open our notes, and we go back and we review chapter 1 again. And then we review chapter 2 again. And after we've done that, now we start with chapter 3. So every study session always means going back first and reviewing the previous material. Why is this useful? Why is this helpful? If you ultimately get to the position where you're taking courses like anatomy and physiology, botany, stuff with these words that are, 30 characters long and stuff, if you're going to remember, and you do need to remember all these terminologies and stuff, you need to repeat these to yourself over and over and over again. And this method will help. Some classes, the final exam is simply another exam. Some classes, the final exam is a comprehensive exam that requires you to still remember those items that you had the first week of class. If you've never looked at those items for 10 weeks, because now you're on chapter 10 and you're only focused on chapter 10, that means you're going to end up cramming for the final. And best practices says that's not the way to do that. So my method of constantly reviewing each night that you study, will yield much better fruit in the long run. That's been my experience. Maybe there's some questions out there?
Yeah, thank you, Ron, for the wonderful information. Does anybody have any questions on the information you presented or anything they thought of during the presentation? Give you guys a couple minutes here. I guess they took it all in.
Yeah. Feel free to use the chat box.
Well, and some of it will make more sense when you have the actual handouts. So.
And I'm going to send everybody a copy of those today. As soon as the meeting has adjourned, we'll send those out. Yeah. Matt says thank you.
Yeah.
That's in the text.
Oh, yeah. You're very welcome, Matt.
Well, if there isn't any specific questions, I did have an additional piece to add on to Ron's presentation. Is I have been recently working with a lot of our online certificate programs, with our online students specifically, and it's interesting because the nature of online courses is that students are taking them for the added flexibility, but it also comes with more responsibility. So I actually have time management tips specifically for online students, just that I've been kind of immersed in right now, and kind of what I've been seeing in working with the students. And they're very similar, though, to some of the tips that Ron gave earlier. Reading the syllabus is an absolute must. I mean, that is, most students really hold to that syllabus, and they do have to remember that it is somewhat fluid, and it can be added to, it can be tweaked. It is not always in stone, but they need to read that syllabus inside and out. And sometimes in an online course, it may not be the easiest to read, depending on how the instructor has it uploaded or input into the course. So I recommend printing it off, having the students actually print it off, even though it's in their online course shell. That way they have it in right in front of them and easily accessible, even when they're not online. The other really important aspect, I would say, is they need to make their own calendar. We here at Bellevue College use Canvas as our online platform. I know you guys at Clark do too, and I don't know about some of the other campuses, but I think most of us, I think, go through Canvas. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. But with Canvas, there is an automated calendar which the instructors can upload the important dates, the quizzes, the tests, the paper deadlines, and the students, again, really rely heavily on this as they do the syllabus. What I highly, highly recommend is for them, as Ron said earlier, when they go through the syllabus, write down in your own personal calendar the important dates. What day is the final exam? What day is your paper due? What days do you have quizzes? What days do you have papers due, etc. All the important assignments. That they have it in front of them, accessible, and not to get on the computer, because we have had actually some issues with the electronic calendar and dates being incorrect. And it's just due to multiple instructors tweaking the information that's viewable on the calendars, and just the electronic version doesn't always seem to reflect what is on the syllabus even too. So I would really suggest for students to make up their own calendar based on the concrete date so that they can visually see out, and especially for time management aspects, to plan ahead accordingly. And then communication with instructors is always a big one. I always encourage students to ask instructors as many questions as they feel comfortable, but yet keep in mind that while this is an online class, your instructor is a human being as well, and also has a job and other obligations as well. So if you don't hear from them within 8 hours, 16 hours, 24 hours, they do have other things going on. So to be mindful of that aspect, because I think with the online and we receive instantaneous information, I think students tend to lose sight of not getting a response instructor within X amount of hours. I know that's a big one. And I constantly hear, oh, I haven't heard from my professor within the past so many hours, so they need to kind of keep that in mind that they are dealing with a human. Also, connecting with classmates is very important in online courses, and if questions don't always get answered by instructors, that the students communicate with each other to maybe seek out those answers, or if somebody in the class had received that information. And I'm not sure, we're still figuring out if there's a good forum through Canvas as far as there being a message board for students to communicate with each other rather than emailing each other through the course. Planning ahead, obviously there's a lot of information presented in online courses in very short amounts of time, so just it is key to be organized and to stay on top of coursework from week to week and make sure they're, also another feature of Canvas is that students are shot kind of weekly snapshots of what's due for the week. And depending on the accuracy of the electronic calendar, this may or may not be correct. So again, that's where I stress to have that your personal calendar and do not rely on that electronic copy. Just be aware, and if there's questions, you know, have them go to their instructor. Lastly, the biggest tip is netiquette. I like the coined phrase that I've heard, is to really be, I mean, it's silly that I have to remind students to be respectful to their classmates and to their instructor, but online, I believe, kind of gives some people gives them kind of more leeway to say things and state things in a way that they would not necessarily do so if they were in an actual classroom with the instructor in front of them present. And I think we can also lose sight of emails that may not be in a proper tone or just not more negative, I would say, communications through electronic means rather than if you were in an in-person classroom. So we suggest, or just remind new students every now and then to be mindful of their instructor and their peers and make sure they're not sending an email that they wouldn't send to if they were in a regular classroom setting. So just reminding of that. And I've included some online sites that I thought had really good applicable tips for online students. So I can send that on to all of you. But that's pretty much what I've been working on right now. Does anybody have any questions about that? It looks like we have some dialogue going on in the chat. Let's see, it looks like Brandy says, if you do what you've always done, you will get what you have always gotten. One of my favorite quotes in regards to shifting your actions to accommodate success in a new environment. That's great, Brandy. I think that is a really good quote to coin. And then another one is do something, if it works, do more of it. If it doesn't, do something else. That's a good one too. Yeah, that's probably a great idea. You probably have those up in your office. Does anybody have any questions about that information presented?
Hi, this is Chloe from Nova.
Hi, Chloe.
I really liked that plan that was laid out, you know, to have the students take a calendar and create a mock schedule and, you know, try to fit in all those hours of studying for all their classes. And I was just wondering if from experience you had, you know, if you had the students revisit it after a few weeks or if there was like a recommended time frame to revisiting it?
Yes, very, very good question. Probably for the first 3 or 4 weeks, I would want them to revisit it, or I would bring it up in class and ask them how that's working for them, whether there have been any specific challenges for them to kind of manage what they put down. I mean, have they actually been able to live with the schedule? You know,
right.
And there's so many little issues that can come up. By definition, a college student is one who suffers from sleep deprivation, almost by definition. But there's so much research out there now that says that depriving yourself of sleep can really hurt you.
Yeah.
And so we want them to be mindful, you know, of these kinds of things and to be focused on what does it take for me to achieve my goals and achieve my sense of purpose for this whole thing. Again, it's useful to remind them that the intensity that I'm trying to get them to measure up to, it's 11 weeks at a time, and then you get a break. So it's not something where it just goes on and it never ends, and so you feel like you're being tortured. It's not like that.
Well, thank you. I
One
found
more
that
thing.
really helpful. Yeah.
Yes, one more thing. Let me throw this in. This is more larger picture, more student success oriented. But I like to constantly make sure that the students hear me say that grades are important, okay? They're important. You will be evaluated on the grades that you get. The grades are not everything. So as much as I want you to do your best and get the best grades possible, for me, the real big picture is relationships. You could be the smartest person in the class, but if you can't get along with people, you're going to have problems. And that's going to show up in your ability maybe not to get a job, but to keep it. So relationships matter. And so the specific example that I would use with students is, at the end of the quarter, and we're in Bellevue, so the example I would use is at the end of the quarter, you're in the Bellevue Mall and you're walking down the mall window shopping. And up ahead of you, you see one of your instructors come in the opposite direction. My hope would be that when your instructor and you meet, the instructor could greet you by your name. Now, that's not
great
that you can afford to take for granted. So in order to ensure that that happens, that means you have to intentionally engage in some behavior over the course of a quarter to make that happen. Almost every instructor that you have is going to give you a syllabus. It's going to have office hours on there. I'd say that over 80% of students never visit their instructor during the office hour. I want you to not be a part of that 80%. I don't care if you already know the answer to this to ask. It's not about the question. It's about establishing a relationship. And then there's a lot of little things that we can use to help them kind of get the point. So if we go back to elementary school or something like that, and I ask you, what is it that you could do to flatter a teacher, get on the good side of a teacher? What might you do? And most everybody will come up with, oh, I could bring an apple to class to give the teacher. Well, yes, you could. And that wouldn't be a bad thing to do. Even at the level I'm at, you know, the student brings an orange or apple, you know, that's very thoughtful of you, right? But the other thing that you could do that's going to embed your personality into the minds of that teacher is take an interest in the subject matter that the teacher is teaching. You do that, you'll never be forgotten. And these teachers put a lot of time in. They went to school a long time to get to the point where they are in front of you teaching these classes. And if you happen to take an interest, that feels good when you have a student who's willing to ask you more in-depth questions and ask you do you have other resources. They'll never forget. In the end, it's about relationships. And so be mindful of that. And that requires intentionality on your part.
Thank you. Well, I think Pat also made a comment there that along with a plan and a schedule that is helpful to remind students that there are other offices on the campus that can help them with time management, such as Stability Office, Veterans Office, Associated Students, Governance Peers, Advising and Counseling, and other support groups. Absolutely. I think knowing, being familiar with all the different centers and departments and services at your main campus is really beneficial so that you can support students and kind of refer them as needed to the proper departments for support. Absolutely.
It's an excellent comment.
And it looks like Randy says that their student life office gives out free student planners. Oh, that's nice. That is a nice feature. Yeah, I don't know if freshmen typically get planners here or if they have to purchase them at the student supply.
Not generally speaking.
Yeah.
some of
Oh,
the
you
specialized programs, yes.
Huh. That's interesting. Okay.
That's ours too.
Most
Yeah,
college
yeah.
campuses have tutoring centers where students can go to. It's important to feel your students out about their attitudes about asking for help. I mean, we've all seen those commercials where the husband and the wife are out driving and they're lost, and the husband's driving, and in her mind she's saying, well, why don't we pull over and ask, you know, and it never would occur to him to do that because asking for help is a sign of what?
Weakness.
Weakness, right? So I think it's useful to feel your students out about some of these kinds of issues, because success at this level is not this Horatio Alger stuff, do it all by yourself. It is about seeking out help, and there is help available. But what is your attitude about seeking help? Or what is your attitude about admitting that this is not an area of strength for me? And if you're dealing with students who psychologically they have blocks because of the way that they look at certain things, then that raises yet another issue. So maybe they need to see a counselor. Maybe they, you know, so it's all integrated. But I keep saying relationship. So from my point of view as a teacher, it's about my relationship with them and trying to discern, you know, what are their issues and how can I be of service and help.
Pam, do we want to go over any best practices, or
Sure.
should we?
So it looks like we have about 10 minutes left. And so does anyone out there, do you all have any best practices or challenges you'd like to share, either on the topic of time management or anything else you're dealing with in student support services? So everything must be going wonderfully.
It's just us.
Please status quo. Does anyone here have anything?
Oh,
Okay, great. Well, if you think of something later, feel free to email the group. And so I just want to thank Ron again. We really appreciate you coming over.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, thanks for planning this meeting.
sure.
Yes.
I do have one last thing. And this goes to the issue of listening skills, right? It's very, very important that we as teachers working with students listen very carefully to what they say and pay very careful attention to what they write, because in that, sometimes there's a revelation that allows us to go to another level with them. So the example that I would give is I often hear students say things like, maybe we're looking at the courses they need to take for the associate's degree. Oh, I have to take math. I hate math. I've never been good at math, you know. So when I hear that language, I never let it go. I never let it go. I challenge them right then and there. Maybe you haven't been as good as you would have liked to have been in the past, but don't self-defeat yourself going forward by saying, I can't do this. You can do anything that you apply yourself to.
Okay.
Very important to listen carefully and then react.
Looks like we did have a few challenges listed here. It looks like Pat says she's having a hard time getting students to follow through with their plan. Any suggestions on that front? Have them put their plan on their refrigerator so they can see it every day.
Yeah, good best practice.
I don't know if there's an opportunity for this, but if there's an opportunity for peer group, it's often helpful, I think, to have people state what their plan is or their intentions or deadlines in front of other people and make a commitment to that in front of others that they can then hold each other accountable. So I don't know if that's an option, but that's one idea.
There was a question earlier about whether we follow up with some of these planning things, and many of the teachers I work with actually require students to come to them. It's part of your syllabus, grading, require them to come in and meet with them once or twice over the course of a quarter. And that creates the opportunity for you to, in more of a private setting, ask them if there are any specific challenges to them living up to these commitments that they make.
So I see a challenge that Matt brings up a really good point, is that they offered tutoring, on-campus tutoring, and only 3 students took advantage of the service despite regular offers, and almost half of the students ended up failing, 1 or more of the summer courses. Interesting. Okay, so you're trying to figure out how to best support these students. Yeah, that's always with us here too, with some of our bigger groups of students that we work with. We always put it out there, and I regularly contact them and only get so many takers about these services, whether it's academic or career. So that is an interesting point to bring up, is how do you get them more engaged? How do you get them to take advantage of the services more readily? Yeah, that's a good point, Matt.
Does anyone have any suggestions for that? Or I'm also wondering, have you done any like surveying to get feedback from students about why they aren't participating in that? Okay, so not yet.
The issue came up about other services within student services. So one of the things that I'll do, like that first day of class, is to make the students aware of many of those support services that are on the campus. I pay specific attention to the counseling center. Because one of the things that I've discovered is sometimes the challenge that we're really dealing with is this pervasive lack of confidence in the students, okay? This pervasive sense of lack of confidence. And for many students, that's embarrassing. So they don't want to admit that in front of, a bunch of people, that they haven't been a really good student or a top flight, student and stuff. So if we know, though, that what they're really dealing with is lack of confidence, then we have to bring to bear a holistic approach to helping them. So what we've talked about here today, as straightforward as it is, there's another issue that needs to be addressed before they can really, really take the ball and run with it.
That's a good comment, Matt, too, that you brought up with course evaluations. We actually recently started them as well, asking what was challenging for the students that might provide some insight as to how to best support them. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that is something that we should look at as well. I think that might be beneficial.
Okay, great. Does anyone have anything else before we close? Okay, thanks everyone. Our meeting next month, we'll be having a guest speaker who's a health IT recruiter, giving us some tips on optimizing LinkedIn profiles and just other tips from a recruiter on employment. So look forward to talking to you all then.
Thank you.
Thank you.